She was being sold as an Apache slave, but he chose to save her at any cost. The early morning sun cast a soft golden light over the small frontier town of Willow Creek. Birds chirped quietly, and a thin mist hovered above the wooden streets. Life in the town moved slowly, with people opening their shops, tending to horses, or heading toward the river to fetch water. It was a quiet town, far from the bustling cities, where every neighbor knew one another, and people relied on each other for safety. But that morning, an unsettling tension lingered in the air, though few could yet name it. Clara stood at the edge of the forest that bordered the town, her hands tightly gripping the basket of bread she had carried from the bakery. She had lived in Willow Creek all her life, a girl known for her gentle smile and kind heart. Everyone liked her, and she had a certain quiet strength that made her reliable in small emergencies. But life had always been simple and safe for Clara, and she had never imagined the dangers that existed beyond the town's familiar streets. Today, however, that peace would be shattered in ways she could not yet comprehend. Unbeknownst to Clara, a group of men had been watching the town for days. They were traders who dealt in more than just goods. They had connections with dangerous groups beyond the settlements, including those who captured people and sold them as slaves. Their eyes had been fixed on Clara for a long time, and now, as she walked alone toward the market, they saw their opportunity. In a blink, her peaceful morning transformed into terror. The moment she noticed the movement from the corner of her eye, it was already too late. Strong hands grabbed her arms and a rough cloth covered her mouth. Fear surged through her like wildfire, but Clara fought with everything she had. She kicked, screamed, and struggled, hoping someone would come to her aid. The sounds of the town, birds, footsteps, merchants calling out became distant echoes. Her heart pounded and every thought raced through her mind. I can't leave here. I won't. Someone must help me. Across the street, Daniel was walking toward the bakery, carrying a satchel of tools. He was a young man in his mid-20s, strong and thoughtful, with eyes that seemed to notice everything around him. He had always been known in Willow Creek for his courage and fairness. That morning, he noticed the sudden commotion near the edge of the forest. People usually greeted each other warmly in the mornings, and any disturbance drew attention quickly. But as Daniel approached, he realized the situation was different, dark, frightening, and dangerous. From his vantage point, he saw Clara struggling against the men. The sight filled him with a mix of shock and determination. He could not ignore it, not when a person's life was at stake. Without a second thought, Daniel ran toward them, his boots pounding against the wooden street. His heart raced, but he focused on every step, every detail. He noted the way the men held Clara, the strength of their grip, and the path they intended to take. He understood immediately that this was not a petty crime. It was a planned act, and it would require courage and cleverness to stop it. Clara's strength was remarkable for a girl her size. She twisted and turned, managed to slip an elbow free, and hit one of her captors in the chest. The man staggered, giving her a moment of hope. She shouted as loud as she could, calling for anyone in the town to help her. But the men were skilled in their cruel work. They covered her mouth again and pulled her quickly toward a waiting wagon. Panic surged through her, but even in her fear, a small flame of determination burned. She would not give up easily. She could not. Daniel reached the edge of the street and assessed the situation. He could see the wagon waiting, ready to take Clara away to a place from which she might never return. The town was mostly unaware of what was happening. A few curious onlookers peered from windows, frozen in fear, unsure of how to help. Daniel knew he had to act alone. The thought of running back to get help crossed his mind, but he dismissed it immediately. Time was too short. Every second mattered. Every delay increased the danger to Clara. He made a decision. He would intervene no matter the risk. The men were armed and dangerous, but Daniel's courage and quick thinking were his allies. He grabbed a heavy wooden plank from a nearby stall and ran toward the wagon. His mind raced with plans, assessing each step with precision. As he got closer, he could hear Clara's muffled screams and the rough voices of the captors. He shouted at them, trying to startle them, hoping to distract them just long enough for Clara to escape. The men turned their attention toward him, their faces twisted in anger and surprise. One of them raised a whip, but Daniel was faster. He swung the plank, hitting the nearest man across the arm. The man yelped and stumbled backward. Another man lunged at Daniel, but he dodged quickly, using his strength and agility. Clara, noticing the opening, seized the moment. She freed herself from the remaining grip and ran toward the edge of the street, her feet moving as fast as they could carry her. Daniel caught up to her and grabbed her hand. "Run!" he shouted. Clara didn't need to be told twice. She ran beside him, her heart still pounding but fueled by relief and hope. The men tried to chase them, but Daniel used his knowledge of the town to guide Clara through alleys and hidden paths. Every step was crucial. Every turn could mean life or death. The town seemed to hold its breath as the two ran, shadows moving quickly under the rising sun. Eventually, they reached a small, abandoned cabin at the edge of the town, a place Daniel knew would provide temporary safety. He helped Clara inside and barred the door as quietly as possible. Both were breathing heavily, their faces flushed with exertion and fear. For a few moments, they simply sat in silence, processing what had just happened. Clara looked at Daniel with wide eyes, her gratitude and amazement evident. She had feared the worst, but now here was a stranger, risking everything for her safety. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, though he could see the answer in her trembling frame. I think so," Clara replied, her voice still shaky. "Thank you, you saved me." Daniel shook his head, emphasizing his determination. "No, we're not done yet. They will come after you again. We have to be careful. I won't let them take you." The moment was heavy with a mix of relief and the realization of the danger still ahead. Clara's fear was still alive, but now it was paired with a spark of hope. Daniel's bravery had changed everything, showing her that even in the darkest moments, courage could create a path to safety. Outside, the town began to stir, unaware of the life-or-death struggle that had unfolded mere blocks away. But Daniel and Clara had a moment to breathe, to plan, and to prepare for the challenges that lay ahead. The events of that morning would mark the beginning of a journey neither would ever forget, a story of courage, determination, and the human spirit's ability to fight for what is right. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting warmth over the streets of Willow Creek, Daniel and Clara knew that the road ahead would be dangerous. But for now, they had won a small victory, a moment of safety, and a bond forged in the fire of adversity. And as they looked at each other, silently acknowledging the gravity of what had occurred, both understood one truth clearly. They would face whatever came next together, and neither would back down in the fight for freedom and justice. After the terrifying morning, the small cabin where Daniel and Clara had taken refuge seemed almost like a sanctuary. Outside, the sun shone on Willow Creek, but inside the air was thick with tension. Clara sat on a worn wooden chair, still trembling slightly, while Daniel moved quietly around the small room, examining the weak walls, the small window, and the door that led outside. Every detail mattered now. Every possible weakness could mean danger. Daniel had lived in the town his entire life. He knew Willow Creek better than anyone. Every hidden path, every abandoned barn, every overgrown trail was familiar to him. And yet he understood that this time he could not rely on the town itself to protect Clara. The men who had tried to take her were skilled, dangerous, and part of a larger network of criminals who cared little for life. They would not give up easily. He could not afford mistakes. "We need a plan," Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. Clara nodded, her hands clenching her knees. She had seen enough danger to understand the seriousness of the situation, but her eyes held determination now, not just fear. Daniel had saved her and she wanted to do everything she could to stay safe. "Do you know where they're taking me?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Daniel shook his head slowly. "Not exactly, but I know the general direction they travel to trade and sell, things like this. It's dangerous territory beyond the town, but if we act carefully we can stop them or at least keep you safe until we find help." Clara swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. I don't know how I could help. I'm not strong like you." Daniel smiled faintly. "You're stronger than you think. Courage isn't just about fighting, it's about thinking, staying calm, and making smart choices. We'll need both." For the next several hours, Daniel quietly made preparations. He gathered supplies from a small pack he kept for emergencies, a few pieces of bread, a flask of water, a knife, and some rope. He also carefully examined the small cabin, looking for hidden places where Clara could hide if someone came searching. He taught her how to use the shadows, how to move quietly, and how to listen for danger before it arrived. Clara absorbed everything with keen attention. She was afraid, yes, but she also felt a spark of hope. For the first time since her capture, she realized she was not entirely powerless. Daniel had not only saved her life, he was teaching her how to survive, and that knowledge gave her courage. As night fell, the two of them remained quiet, listening to the sounds outside. The wind rustled through the trees, and the distant calls of owls echoed through the forest. The town slept, unaware of the danger that had almost claimed one of its own. Daniel and Clara took turns keeping watch, understanding that the quiet of the night could easily be broken by danger. The next morning, Daniel began formulating a plan to intercept the captors before they could escape the region with Clara. He knew that the men would follow certain routes to avoid the main roads, using hidden paths and overgrown trails. Using his knowledge of the surrounding wilderness, Daniel charted a course that would allow them to approach without being seen. He also considered contingencies, places to hide, escape routes, and ways to signal for help if things went wrong. Clara watched him quietly, noting every detail. "How do you know all this?" she asked. Daniel shrugged lightly. "I've lived here all my life. I know the woods, the rivers, and the hills, but more than that, I've learned to pay attention. You notice things when your life depends on it." That afternoon, they left the cabin, moving cautiously through the trees. Daniel kept them low in the shadows, teaching Clara how to step quietly over roots and stones. Every sound, every rustle of leaves could signal danger. Clara's heart pounded with a mix of fear and excitement. For the first time, she felt like she had a purpose, like she was part of something important. After several hours of careful movement, they reached a ridge overlooking a narrow trail. Daniel knelt beside Clara, pointing to the path below. "This is it," he whispered. "They'll pass here on their way to the trading camp. We need to stay hidden and wait." Clara nodded, though her hands were trembling. She had never been part of anything like this before. Yet, as she crouched beside Daniel, she felt a strange mix of fear and determination. She trusted him completely, and that trust gave her strength. The hours passed slowly. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the trail. Clara's eyes scanned every movement, her mind alert to every sound. Daniel remained calm, whispering instructions and reminders. "Stay quiet, move only if necessary, watch for signs of danger." Finally, movement appeared on the trail below. A small group of men was approaching, and Daniel's sharp eyes recognized them immediately. These were the same men who had tried to take Clara the day before. The sight of them brought a surge of adrenaline to both Daniel and Clara. This was the moment they had been preparing for. Daniel gestured to Clara to stay hidden while he stepped closer. Using the ridge for cover, he observed the men's formation and behavior. He noted their weapons, their positions, and their attention to the trail. The men were confident, unaware that someone was watching them. Daniel took a deep breath and formulated his next move. He whispered to Clara, "When I give the signal, we move. Stick close to me. Remember everything I've taught you." Clara nodded, her eyes wide but focused. She could feel her heart pounding, but she knew that panic would be dangerous. Every lesson Daniel had taught her now mattered more than ever. As the men approached a bend in the trail, Daniel sprang into action. He shouted and threw a rock to startle them, creating confusion. One man turned to see the source of the noise, while the others hesitated. Using the momentary distraction, Daniel ran down to the trail and grabbed Clara's hand. "Now!" he shouted. Clara ran beside him, her feet pounding the earth as adrenaline surged through her veins. The men shouted in surprise and anger, but Daniel used his knowledge of the terrain to guide them. They ducked behind trees, climbed over fallen logs, and used every obstacle to slow their pursuers. Clara's courage grew with each step. She was no longer just the frightened girl from the town. She was part of a team, working together with Daniel to survive. The chase led them into a narrow canyon, where the terrain favored those who knew it. Daniel and Clara moved quickly, while the men struggled to keep up. The sound of voices and footsteps echoed through the canyon, but Daniel stayed focused, guiding Clara with clear instructions. Every choice, every step could mean life or death. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only a few minutes, they reached a hidden clearing. Daniel led Clara behind a large rock formation, motioning for her to stay low. The men passed by, unaware of their location. Daniel watched until they disappeared into the distance, then turned to Clara with a small smile. "You did well," he said quietly. Clara exhaled a long breath, feeling both relief and exhaustion. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied. Daniel shook his head. "No, we did it together. That's the important part. You've been brave, and that matters just as much as anything else." As they rested in the clearing, Daniel explained what they would do next. They could not stay in one place for long. The captors might return or send others to look for them. They needed to move carefully, find allies, and stay alert. Clara listened, understanding the gravity of their situation. But she also felt a sense of hope. She had survived, learned to fight in her own way, and discovered a courage she didn't know she had. The night fell again, bringing a cool breeze and the sounds of the forest. Daniel and Clara huddled close, sharing a small meal and making plans for the next day. They would continue their journey, stay hidden, and look for help. Each day would be dangerous, but together, they had proven they could face threats that seemed impossible. As they looked up at the stars, Clara felt a deep gratitude toward Daniel. He had risked everything to save her, and in doing so, he had given her the chance not just to survive, but to fight back. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that with him by her side, she had a chance. And in that moment, the bond between them grew stronger, built on trust, courage, and the shared determination to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The next morning, Daniel and Clara woke before the sun, the forest around them still shrouded in mist. The night had been cold, and sleep had been short and uneasy. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig had made them tense, reminding them that danger was never far. But despite their exhaustion, they both felt a renewed determination. The men who had tried to capture Clara would not give up easily, and neither could they. They had come too far to turn back now. Daniel stood, stretching his tired muscles. "We need to move carefully today," he whispered. "If we can reach the river and follow it downstream, we might find a trading post. Someone there can help us, but we have to be cautious. The captors could be anywhere along the trails." Clara nodded silently. She was still learning to trust her own instincts, but she knew she could rely on Daniel. He had saved her life, and now he was guiding her through dangerous terrain. Every step they took, she felt her confidence growing, though the fear never fully left her. It was a constant companion, one she had learned to respect. As they moved through the forest, the sunlight slowly pierced the thick canopy, creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. Daniel led Clara carefully, pointing out areas where they could hide if someone approached. He taught her how to move silently, how to step on soft patches of moss instead of brittle leaves, and how to use natural obstacles to their advantage. Each lesson was small, but each one made Clara feel stronger and more capable. After several hours of cautious travel, they came to a narrow path that wound along the side of a hill. Daniel paused, listening intently. From somewhere below, he could hear voices and the faint clatter of hooves. He motioned for Clara to crouch behind a thick bush, and they waited, hearts pounding. The group of men appeared soon after, moving along the path as if unaware of anyone nearby. Daniel's eyes narrowed. These were the same men who had tried to take Clara before, and now they were armed and confident. They carried ropes, weapons, and the kind of cruel expression that spoke of experience in capturing others. Daniel knew that a direct confrontation would be dangerous, but he also knew that they could not simply run. The men would catch up if they did, and Clara's safety depended on clever thinking. Daniel whispered to Clara, "Stay calm and follow my lead. We're going to create a distraction." Clara's hands shook, but she nodded. She had learned from Daniel that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. She trusted him completely. Daniel picked up a few stones and quietly positioned himself near the edge of the path. With careful aim, he threw one toward a tree further down the trail. The stone struck the tree with a sharp crack, startling the men. They looked toward the sound, momentarily distracted. Seizing the opportunity, Daniel grabbed Clara's hand, and they darted down a side trail that led into denser forest. The men shouted in confusion, realizing something was wrong. They began to pursue, but Daniel used his knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. He guided Clara over fallen logs, through thick underbrush, and across shallow streams. Each step required careful balance and quick thinking. Clara's heart pounded, but she found herself growing stronger with every movement. She followed Daniel without hesitation, trusting his judgment and learning to move quietly and quickly herself. After what felt like hours but was only a short chase, they reached a small clearing. Daniel motioned for Clara to hide behind a large boulder while he observed the men from a higher position. The captors were frustrated, shouting at each other and searching for any sign of them. Daniel studied their movements, noting their weakness. They were organized, but their confidence made them predictable. He realized that if they were clever, they could turn the pursuers' own mistakes against them. Daniel whispered to Clara, "We're going to make them think we've gone one way while we go another. It will confuse them and give us a chance to escape." Clara listened carefully, nodding. She had begun to understand that survival required patience, observation, and courage. Together, they could outsmart the men who had once seemed unstoppable. Using the forest to conceal their movements, Daniel and Clara doubled back along a hidden trail. They paused at several points to ensure they were not being followed. Every rustle of leaves or distant shout made Clara tense, but she continued to trust Daniel and follow his guidance. Her fear was still present, but it was tempered by growing confidence and determination. As they moved, they encountered a fallen tree blocking their path. Daniel assessed it carefully. "We can climb over it, but we have to be quick and silent," he whispered. Clara nodded and followed him as he led her over the obstacle. Each small victory, each careful movement, reinforced the bond between them. They were no longer just two people running from danger. They were a team, united by a shared goal and mutual trust. Eventually, they reached a narrow ravine where the river flowed swiftly below. Daniel pointed out a series of rocks that could be used to cross without making much noise. Clara took a deep breath, steadied herself, and followed Daniel carefully from one rock to the next. The water rushed beneath them, a reminder of the dangers all around. But with each step, Clara felt her courage growing. Once they reached the other side, Daniel motioned for her to rest. They were temporarily safe, but Daniel knew that the captors could still be tracking them. "We need to keep moving," he said. "We can't stay in one place for long." They will come looking, and we need to find a secure location where we can regroup and plan our next steps." Clara nodded, exhausted but determined. She had survived the initial capture, the chase through the forest, and the confrontation with the men. Each challenge had tested her, but she had also discovered a resilience she had never known. Daniel's guidance had taught her the value of patience, observation, and courage, and she now understood that survival required both strength and intelligence. As they continued along the riverbank, Daniel spoke quietly about their plan. They would head toward a nearby trading post, a place where they could find allies and support. Along the way, they would need to avoid main roads, stay hidden in the forest, and remain vigilant for any signs of the captors. Every step would be dangerous, but Daniel believed that with careful planning and mutual trust, they could succeed. Clara listened closely, absorbing every instruction. She realized that her role was just as important as Daniel's. She could observe, plan, and make decisions that might save them both. The fear she had felt in the beginning had transformed into focus and determination. She was no longer just a victim. She was an active participant in her own survival. Hours passed as they moved cautiously through the dense forest. The sun began to set, casting long shadows and creating a golden glow on the treetops. They paused to rest, sharing a small meal of bread and water. Daniel encouraged Clara to eat, knowing that they needed strength for whatever challenges lay ahead. She chewed slowly, savoring the food and the brief moment of calm. As darkness fell, Daniel and Clara found a small hollow beneath a large tree to rest for the night. They kept watch in shifts, aware that the captors could still be searching for them. The forest at night was both beautiful and threatening, filled with sounds that could be either harmless animals or signs of approaching danger. Clara lay quietly, listening to Daniel's instructions and reflecting on how much she had learned in just a short time. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Every step she had taken with Daniel had required careful thought, quick decision-making, and trust in her companion. She felt a deep gratitude toward him, knowing that his bravery and guidance had saved her life. By the time the first light of dawn broke through the trees, Clara and Daniel were ready to continue their journey. They had survived the immediate confrontation, but the larger challenge still lay ahead. They would need to reach the trading post, find allies, and ensure that Clara would never again be at the mercy of dangerous captors. As they moved forward, Daniel glanced at Clara, noticing the determination in her eyes. She had changed over the past day. Fear was still present, but it was now balanced with courage, intelligence, and resilience. Together, they had faced danger, outsmarted the men who pursued them, and survived challenges that would have overwhelmed most people. Daniel knew that the confrontation was far from over, but he also knew that they were stronger together. With careful planning, trust, and courage, they could face whatever came next. And Clara understood that she was no longer just a passive participant in her own story. She was an active force, capable of making decisions, taking risks, and surviving against the odds. The forest stretched ahead, full of unknown dangers, but also full of hope. Daniel and Clara moved forward, side by side, ready to confront whatever challenges awaited them. The journey was far from over, but they had proven that courage, determination, and trust could overcome even the greatest dangers. The morning mist clung to the trees as Daniel and Clara continued their journey. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet, and the only sounds were the soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the occasional bird calling in the distance. Both of them moved cautiously, knowing that the men who had tried to capture Clara were still tracking them. Every shadow seemed to hide danger, every rustle of leaves could be a threat, and every step demanded focus and careful thought. Daniel led the way, scanning the area for any signs of the captors. He knew that they would use every advantage the terrain offered, looking for places where they could intercept Clara and take her again. He also knew that the forest could protect them if they were clever. Thick trees, overgrown trails, and hidden hollows could be used to their advantage. He whispered instructions to Clara, reminding her to stay low, move quietly, and follow his lead. Clara had grown more confident since their first confrontation. She had learned to read the forest, notice subtle signs, and anticipate danger. Her heart still raced with fear at times, but she had discovered a strength within herself she had never known before. Each step they took was a test, and each challenge they faced taught her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. As they moved deeper into the forest, Daniel paused to listen. There it was, a distant shout, faint but unmistakable. The captors were close, searching for them. He motioned for Clara to stay behind a large oak tree and crouch low. They could not afford to be seen, and every second of concealment counted. "They're coming this way," Daniel whispered. "We have to move quickly but carefully. Follow my lead and don't make a sound." Clara nodded, her hands gripping her knees. She felt her pulse quicken, but she also felt determination. She would not be captured again, not after all they had been through. Together, they began moving along a narrow ridge that overlooked a small stream below. The path was rough, with loose stones and thick roots, but Daniel guided Clara carefully, helping her over obstacles and keeping her calm. The forest grew thicker as they descended toward the stream. Daniel knew that the water could be both a risk and an advantage. Crossing the stream would make noise, but it could also hide their scent and confuse anyone tracking them. He signaled to Clara to wait while he tested the water with a stick, ensuring it was safe to cross. Once he confirmed the depth and current, Daniel held out his hand to Clara. "We go together. Step carefully and trust me." Clara took a deep breath and followed him, stepping from rock to rock as the water rushed beneath them. Her heart pounded with each movement, but Daniel's calm guidance gave her courage. On the other side, they paused to catch their breath and listen. The shouts of the captors were closer now, echoing through the trees. They had to keep moving. They followed the stream for several miles, using its twists and turns to hide their trail. Daniel pointed out areas where they could rest briefly, hidden behind thick bushes or large rocks. Clara appreciated the care he took to keep her safe, and she continued to learn from him with every step. She noticed small details, the way leaves were disturbed, the direction of footprints, and the subtle signs that indicated whether they were being followed. Each observation made her feel more in control, more capable of surviving in this dangerous world. As the sun climbed higher, Daniel spotted a small clearing ahead. It appeared abandoned, a perfect place to rest and regain some energy. He motioned for Clara to follow him quietly. They moved carefully into the clearing, crouching behind large rocks to remain unseen. From their hiding place, they could see smoke rising in the distance. Daniel recognized it immediately. It was a sign of a nearby settlement or trading post. "That's our chance," he whispered. "If we can reach it, we might find people who can help us, but we have to be careful. The captors could be between us and the post, and we don't know how many there are." Clara nodded, her eyes fixed on the distant smoke. Hope surged within her, but it was tempered by the knowledge of danger. She had learned that every moment could bring a challenge, and she would need all her courage to reach safety. They waited for a moment, listening to the forest. The sounds of pursuit had faded slightly, but Daniel knew it was only temporary. He scanned the area and noticed a narrow path that would allow them to move toward the post while staying hidden. "We take this path," he whispered. "It's not easy, but it's safer than moving through open ground." Clara followed him closely as they moved along the path, their movements careful and deliberate. The forest was dense, branches scratching at their faces, roots threatening to trip them with every step. But they pressed on, determined to reach safety. Suddenly, a loud shout rang out from behind them. Daniel froze and glanced back. The captors had found their trail and were closing in quickly. He grabbed Clara's hand. "Run!" he shouted. They sprinted along the narrow path, dodging trees and leaping over roots. The captors were close now, their shouts echoing through the forest. Clara's lungs burned, her legs ached, but she refused to stop. Every step forward was a step toward freedom, and she would not give up. Daniel led them to a narrow ravine, the sides steep and covered in thick underbrush. He pointed to a hidden ledge just above the ravine. "Climb up here," he instructed. "It's tricky, but it will slow them down." Clara followed his lead, using her hands to pull herself up the ledge. Daniel went first, helping her reach safety. Once they were both on the ledge, they paused to catch their breath. Below, the captors struggled to find a way up, their frustration evident. Daniel allowed himself a brief smile. Their plan was working, they were staying one step ahead, but there was no time to relax. Daniel scanned the area and noticed another obstacle. A fallen tree blocked the path to the post. It would be slow to cross and it could expose them to danger. He turned to Clara. "We have to move carefully over that tree. Step lightly and don't hesitate." Clara nodded and followed him across the makeshift bridge, balancing carefully. Her fear was still present, but it was balanced with determination and trust in Daniel. Every step brought them closer to safety, and she refused to let it slip away. After crossing the tree, they continued toward the post, the smoke now closer and clearer. Daniel kept them low, using every available shadow for cover. Clara felt a mix of exhaustion and hope that they could reach safety, and exhaustion from the relentless chase. But she pressed on, knowing that stopping now would be dangerous. Finally, they reached the edge of the post. It was a small settlement, with people working in the fields and tending to animals. Daniel quickly scanned for a safe place to approach without drawing attention. He spotted a small barn near the edge of the settlement and led Clara toward it. Inside the barn, they found temporary shelter. Clara sank to the floor, breathing heavily, her body trembling from exhaustion. Daniel crouched beside her, speaking quietly. "We're safe for now," he said. "But we can't stay here long. We need to find someone we can trust, someone who can help protect you." Clara looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and determination. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Daniel shook his head. "You've been brave too. You've learned to survive, to think, and to act. That matters just as much as anything I've done." As the day wore on, they remained hidden in the barn, observing the settlement and planning their next move. Daniel had a rough idea of who might be trustworthy, and he prepared to approach them carefully. Clara listened, absorbing every detail. She understood that their journey was far from over, but she also knew that they were one step closer to freedom. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the barn. Daniel and Clara shared a small meal, conserving their strength for the challenges ahead. They discussed their plan for the next day, deciding how they would approach the people in the settlement and what steps they would take to ensure Clara's safety. As night fell, Daniel kept watch while Clara rested. The sounds of the forest and the settlement mingled, a reminder that danger could still be near. But for the first time in days, they felt a small measure of hope. They had survived the chase, outsmarted the captors, and reached a place where help might be possible. Clara reflected on everything that had happened. She realized that courage was not just about fighting or running. It was about thinking, observing, and acting wisely. She had learned to trust herself, trust Daniel, and face danger head-on. Each step they had taken together had strengthened her resolve and taught her the true meaning of survival. Daniel looked at Clara and smiled faintly. He knew the next steps would be difficult, but he also knew that together, they could overcome the challenges ahead. The captors were still out there, but with careful planning, courage, and trust, they had a chance. And that chance was all that mattered. The first rays of sunlight touched the small settlement as Daniel and Clara prepared for the day ahead. The previous night had been long and tense, filled with quiet planning and cautious observation. They had survived the chase, outsmarted the captors, and reached a place where help was possible. Now, the challenge was to find someone trustworthy in the settlement who could protect Clara and ensure that she would never be in danger again. Daniel led Clara quietly through the narrow paths between the small houses and barns. People were beginning their daily routines, tending animals, carrying water, and preparing meals. Most of them glanced curiously at the newcomers, but no one seemed to notice the urgency in Daniel and Clara's movements. They approached a modest house near the center of the settlement where an older man was repairing a fence. Daniel nodded to him politely and called out softly. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "We need help. There are dangerous men after this young woman and she's in great danger. We need someone we can trust." The man looked up, his face lined with age and experience. He studied them carefully before responding. "Dangerous men, you say? Come inside quickly. You don't want to be seen out here for long." Inside the small house, Daniel and Clara explained the situation. Clara spoke with honesty and clarity, recounting her capture, the pursuit, and the courage Daniel had shown in saving her. The older man listened quietly, nodding occasionally, his expression serious. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair and spoke with authority. "You did the right thing by coming here," he said. "There are always people who will take advantage of the weak, but there are also those who will help. I will make sure she is safe." Daniel nodded, relief washing over him. "Thank you, but what about the men who are after her? They're dangerous and I fear they won't give up so easily." The older man smiled faintly. "Then we must be clever. They will not expect a united settlement to stand together. We can protect her, and with some planning, we can make sure she is never threatened again." Over the next several hours, the settlement prepared to assist. Clara was given a safe room in one of the houses, hidden from view, while Daniel helped fortify the area. People worked together, placing barriers, setting watch points, and creating ways to signal each other if danger approached. Clara observed, feeling a mixture of gratitude and awe. She realized that courage was not only about action, it was also about community, trust, and planning. Daniel remained by her side, quietly teaching her how to stay alert and aware of her surroundings. He explained that danger could come in many forms, not just the men who had captured her. Even in places that seemed safe, caution was necessary. Clara listened, absorbing every detail, and began to understand the depth of strategy required to stay safe in a world that was not always kind. By evening, the settlement had settled into a cautious routine. Clara felt safe for the first time in days, but the events of the past week were never far from her mind. She thought of the fear she had felt, the chase through the forest, and the courage it had taken to survive. And she thought of Daniel, whose bravery had saved her life and whose guidance had taught her to be strong. "Daniel," she said quietly as they sat together in the safe room, "I can't thank you enough. You risked everything for me. I don't know what I would have done without you." Daniel shook his head. "You've been brave too, Clara. You've learned to act, to think, and to trust yourself. That matters just as much as anything I've done. Courage is not just about strength. It's about making choices when fear is all around you." Clara smiled faintly, feeling a sense of pride and gratitude. She realized that the journey had changed her in ways she had not expected. She was no longer the frightened girl who had been captured. She was a young woman who had faced danger, made decisions, and survived through courage, trust, and intelligence. The following morning, Daniel and Clara were invited to meet with the leader of the settlement, a kind yet firm woman named Martha. Martha had heard the full story and was determined to help. She arranged for Clara to stay in the settlement until arrangements could be made to ensure her long-term safety. She also promised that Daniel would be supported in any efforts to stop the men who had pursued her. Clara felt a deep sense of relief. For the first time since her capture, she truly believed she could be safe. But she also understood that the journey had not only been about escaping danger. It had been about discovering her own strength and the strength of those who chose to do what was right. Over the next few days, Clara began to adjust to life in the settlement. She helped with small chores, learned from the people around her, and continued to develop the skills Daniel had taught her. Each day she grew more confident, more self-reliant, and more aware of her own capabilities. Daniel remained close, offering guidance and encouragement, but he also allowed her to take initiative and make decisions. The trust between them deepened, forged in the fire of shared danger and survival. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Daniel and Clara walked along the edge of the settlement. The sky was painted in shades of gold and orange, reflecting off the small river that ran nearby. The world seemed calm, almost peaceful, but both of them knew the trials they had faced and the courage it had taken to survive. "You know," Clara said softly, "I used to think that bravery was only for heroes in stories, but now I see that it's something ordinary people do every day in moments that matter. You showed me that." Daniel smiled. "And you've shown me that courage can come from the most unexpected places. You've been brave in ways I could never have imagined. We've both learned a lot." Clara nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest. The fear that had haunted her for so long was replaced with hope, confidence, and a sense of purpose. She realized that while danger might exist in the world, so too did courage, kindness, and the strength to act when it mattered most. As the days passed, Clara continued to heal, both physically and emotionally. She began to make plans for the future, thinking about returning to a safe life in her hometown or perhaps finding a new path where she could help others who had faced danger or injustice. Daniel supported her decisions, always encouraging her to trust herself and her instincts. The captors never returned, likely deterred by the settlement's readiness and unity. Clara knew that she owed her freedom to Daniel's courage, the help of the settlement, and her own determination to survive. She reflected on the journey, the fear, the chase, the confrontations, and the moments of hope, and realized that it had changed her forever. One evening, as they watched the sun sink below the hills, Clara turned to Daniel. "Thank you," she said again, her voice filled with gratitude. "You risked everything for me, and I will never forget that. You taught me what courage really means." Daniel shook his head, smiling faintly. "No, Clara, you've shown me as much as I've shown you. Courage is not just about taking risks. It's about facing fear, making choices, and acting with purpose. You've done all of that and more." The bond between them was quiet but strong, built on trust, shared experiences, and the understanding that courage could take many forms. Clara felt a sense of peace, knowing that she was safe and that she had grown stronger through every challenge. In the days that followed, Clara continued to learn from the people in the settlement, helping where she could and sharing her story quietly with those who might benefit from her experiences. She had survived a terrifying ordeal, but she had also discovered in her strength, resilience, and the importance of trust and guidance. Daniel remained by her side, not as a protector in the same way as before, but as a mentor, a friend, and someone who had been part of her journey. Together, they reflected on the lessons they had learned. That courage was not about fearlessness, but about action. That strength came from both body and mind, and that trust and compassion could make the impossible possible. One quiet evening, as the settlement settled into the calm of night, Clara looked out at the stars. The forest around them was peaceful, the air cool and fresh. She thought of the dangers she had faced, the moments of fear, and the people who had helped her survive. And she realized that the journey had not just been about escaping danger. It had been about discovering the power within herself and the importance of standing with those who choose to do what is right. Daniel stood beside her, watching the same stars, and nodded quietly. The journey was over, but the lessons they had learned would stay with them forever. Clara had been saved, yes, but she had also become stronger, wiser, and braver. And in that quiet moment, They both understood that courage, determination, and trust were more powerful than any danger that might come their way. The forest, the settlement, and the river beyond were silent, a peaceful backdrop to the triumph of survival and the power of human courage. Clara smiled, feeling a sense of completeness, knowing that she was free, safe, and stronger than she had ever been. And Daniel knew that the risks he had taken were worth it, not just for her safety, but for the hope and courage that had grown in the face of fear. Together, they had faced danger, overcome obstacles, and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to face the future. And as the stars shone above, Clara knew that the story of survival, courage, and trust would stay with her forever, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope and bravery could guide the way.